This is iPhotos. Any photos that have been stored in iPhoto are accessible there. I tend not to use it because I'll add them into the media browser. This is music and sound. So the only thing I would ever use in here would be the Final Cut Pro sound effects. But you can also add all of your music there. But again, I would add it into my media browser. And there are tons and tons of effects in there. If you click on them, you can play them and have a listen. So that is an adding machine, apparently. And again, to add those onto your timeline, you would just select it, drag it down here, and it just operates the same as any other media element. The next one is transitions. I tend not to use these, as I mentioned before, because some of them are a bit crazy. Arrows transition, for example. But if you do use them, just try and stick to the simplistic one. Something like a cross dissolve sometimes works well. Occasionally you can use something like a circle if you're making a typically old-fashioned comedy video or something like that. But for the most part, I just stick with changing opacities and then planning your transitions beforehand in your actual cinematography. The next option is text. Again, over here there are tons and tons of options. A lot of them are, you probably wouldn't use as a classic sci-fi style far away option. I would usually just use a basic title and drag that over here to wherever you want it. The reason I would use this is because there are tons and tons of options of how you can change it. So you can change what it says, you can change the font type up here, you can change the font size, you can change absolutely anything that you can typically do on a word processor. But you can also change the colours, how see-through it is, so again the opacity here. You can add outlines, drop shadows, everything like that. So I would usually use that and just change it to however I wanted it. And you can also download additional fonts and they'll be displayed in here. So if you see something online that you think that will work really well, you can download that. These are video generators. There are some really old-fashioned curtain style ones and things like that, but I would tend to steer clear of anything other than the solids on here. I just don't really ever find the need to use them. And you can select a custom solid. So, for example, if you wanted this final clip at the end to fade to black, but you didn't want to use a transition, I would put a custom solid underneath it. Yeah, and then change the opacity. So custom solid underneath, get rid of the excess, and then go on to video animation, opacity, and set that to decrease. And now if we watch this, it's going to fade to black. There we go. So that's usually the only time I would use background generators, other than if I were doing a green screen. So if I were doing a green screen, I would find the effect I'm after in Effects, Keying, and it's this one called Keyer. If I select that, you can actually see your cupboard in the background. Where's the clips that we had selected just now? Where's the one with the cupboard?
Maybe the last one.
Was it the last one? Oh yeah, there it is. So if I drag that onto this one, for example, you can see your cupboard disappeared because it thinks it needs to delete that out. If your background were green, then it would automatically try and delete most of that out. But you can change all the variables here, so you can select the sample of the colour, the strength of the actual green screen and things like that. And then if you have a generator behind, then it will add whatever the colour of that generator is. So if I get rid of this custom example, and if I put, for example, this green one in underneath, it's called IMG, I'm not sure why, you can see that the cupboard is actually green now, because where it's removed, it's replaced it with whatever background I put in there. Obviously that's not a great example because it's not a green screen, but if we did have a green screen video in here, that will work really well. You can also turn off these effects if you add them on by selecting the blue squares next to them. So if you think, oh actually that doesn't look great, you can turn it off there. And you can always then turn it back on rather than deleting it out. The last thing on this effects browser is themes. We tend not to use those because they basically do half the work for you, and you don't learn that way. So they're really good if you're making like a little holiday video at home and you don't want to spend too much time, but other than that, I'd steer clear. There is also an option for retime editing here. So what that means is that we can slow our clips down, we can speed them up. For some reason, slowing down is in percentage and speeding up is in multiplications of. Doesn't make much sense. But just because it's set to these regular intervals, it doesn't mean that you can't change it to whatever you want. If you set this to 50%, I can then take this little tab at the end and I can actually shorten it or lengthen it to whatever percentage I want. You can also use this retime editor to reverse clips, which sometimes looks really good. Most often it doesn't, but it's quite popular at the minute because of the new Snapchat update. So everyone's making backwards videos at the moment. But, and you can also set something to hold. So if you wanted to take a still, so this is not a great example, and you probably won't be happy that I'm taking a still of you. But if I select hold, what it will do is it will just add a still of whichever frame was currently displaying. And again, you can lengthen that, but also something I find quite useful, if you use your blade tool, you can flip it out, and then actually you've got a still that you can use anywhere along your video, and it's not going to it's not going to mean you'd have to take a screen grab and then import it or anything like that. So that's retiming. Let's just delete that section.